Hello and welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Hammer Time. We start with quite a lot of news into the year 2025, and I have a few announcements to make, so I hope I can grab your attention for the next couple of minutes. The first one is, I'll promise, come hell or high water, there will be a new episode every week. I probably will not have every time the perfect setup as you can see it here, but I'll make sure that the audio remains as good as it is now. And even if on occasion I have to do a Peter Saihan video, where he's just somewhere out in the wild doing it with his cell phone, I'll do this as well. But you can rely there will always be one full episode every week. And there will be a new feature, which I call Ralph Reacts, which kind of will also be very often taken in a more intuitive fashion. And the first one will be tonight, because tonight, Thursday, January 9th, is the big SpaceX room between Alice Weidel and Elon Musk. Now at the time of recording, it's just still a couple of hours until this is going to go live, but there will be a reaction video from myself on this conversation, because I think this is going to be quite the landmark when it comes to the political debate and the upcoming election in Germany. That being said, today's episode will feature a couple of very positive things and a couple of, I think, very negative things. We enter a new year, and there is a strong sense, I think, all over the West, that we really are at a turning point in Western civilization. The question, however, is this turning point, will it turn out to be a Russian revolution, a French revolution, or an American revolution? And I think this is going to be very important, not just for me as a commentator, but also for you as people who participate in the public discourse, who are engaged in politics, who are interested in politics, who live and breathe what's going on in culture, what's going on in politics and academia in the public discourse. As times are changing, as we are in a kind of unstable situation where it's not yet clear what the future will bring, I think all of us are in a position to have an impact on how things will ultimately turn out. And I hope that as a role model, I mentioned it before, even though it's an American experience, but that as a role model, the American Revolution can serve as something worthwhile emulating. Because my fear is, maybe a little bit prematurely, but my fear is that if this is going to be the right-wing conservative revolution many of us are hoping for, that it's not just going to be like the left, just a mirror image of it on the right. Like, this should be something new, right? This should be something that is grounded in morality, that has a strong ideological backbone, but also a certain amount of pragmatism. And I think this kind of pragmatism is, so far at least, what comes or what will come from the new Trump administration. We're about 11 days out before the official inauguration, but Trump's re-election already had significant impact. He gave a very interesting press conference yesterday with Ben Shapiro, I think, called it the best press conference ever. I probably wouldn't go that far, but it definitely was entertaining. And they showed a couple of maps. I prepared one map that I think was quite featured, not in the press conference, but that on social media was causing quite the ruckus. And I think it's fun to look at, which is like a little bit the foreign policy vision embodied by Donald Trump. So what you can see on this map, of course, has very humorous undertones, although there is a serious issue about it as well, to which I come in a second. But most importantly, those of you who have been following Hammer Time for a while know that I have the humorous leader rule. And the humorous leader rule means that the leader of a country, if he happens to have a sense of humor, I'm much more sanguine and optimistic about the future of said country. And I think Trump fulfills this rule quite nicely. For example, when he calls Justin Trudeau, the now resigned Prime Minister of Canada, when he calls him the governor of the 51st state, of course he's joking, and I think that's a good thing. There should be humor in politics on occasion. But it also shows something that's quite important, which is that the wealth of a country, for example, in this case, like Canada, of course, is at least partially driven by the success of the United States. I mean, this idea that Canada could do it without the United States is ridiculous, and most Canadians know it. This does not, of course, mean that they should necessarily become the 51st state. The same is true about Greenland, right? There is no talk about militarily invading Greenland and wresting them from Denmark. Denmark is a NATO state. The United States are a NATO state, so that's highly unlikely. There is a military base in Greenland, or as it's called on this map, in Trumpland. So, of course, none of this is going to happen. Trump likes to tease. He's a great troll, as John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, likes to say. He's the world's greatest troll, and he does this quite well here too. But the important issue that we have to keep in mind about all of this is that Donald Trump will pursue his America First policy. And that means that he will pursue the United States national interest. And if this should entail to play a bigger role in areas in the world that are seen as geopolitically relevant, Trump will do this. I don't think that Trump, and he never was, is going to be an isolationist. But I think he's somebody who can do credible deterrence. Very often, being taken seriously as a nation, or as a nation state, as a country, is the best way to prevent an actual military action being necessary. And I think this is something that Trump does quite well. With him bargaining and entering a bargaining position with very high stakes, I think is a very good way to get the other side to back down. He said the same about the hostage situation in the Middle East, where he says, well, if Hamas does not free the hostages that they have taken, then there will be hell to pay. Now, I'm sure that there are at least, maybe, hopefully, some rational members left among Hamas who say, well, we have to take this guy seriously. We didn't have to take Anthony Blinken or Joe Biden seriously, but we have to take Donald Trump seriously. So hopefully this conflict will come to an end quite quickly as well. The same is probably true in Ukraine. Trump will drive a hard bargain. I don't think as many of his detractors are saying that he will simply hand over Ukraine to Russia, that he will simply lift the sanctions. I do not think that this is going to happen because from the outset, that would not look like a win. And I think what Trump wants to do is he wants to list up win after win after win after win. But he also wants to end this conflict in Ukraine. So I think something is going to happen. So we'll see about this as well. The same is true, of course, in the case of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal, for economic reasons, for geopolitical, geoeconomic reasons, is very important for the United States. And there is, justifiably so, the impression that the state of Panama has, in the last couple of years, come awfully close to China and to handing over at least partial control of the Panama Canal to China. This is obviously something that the United States don't look upon very benevolently, so they're going to do something about it. I think that's just classic standard geopolitics, and that's also going to happen under Trump. So I think this idea that in this so-called multipolar world, and we're going to do a special episode on multipolarity because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding what this will potentially mean. But even if we assume that there is something more akin to a multipolar world, I don't think that this means that Trump is simply going to retreat from the world and that the United States are going to retreat from the world. I do not think that this is going to be Trump's policy. Another thing that we see happening even before Trump has taken office is in the realm of freedom of speech. I know that many of you have probably seen the quick video that Mark Zuckerberg has published just a couple of days ago about changes at Facebook and changes at Meta. And it's become quite obvious that in the realm of social media, it started with Elon Musk taking over X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I think I will forever call it Twitter. But now we see the same happening at Facebook, that Mark Zuckerberg has announced that they will change the algorithm in a way that it will allow more free speech, that it will allow more things that were viewed critically in the past, that where censorship was kicking in, that this is no longer going to happen. More importantly, this is from the Spectator Index, is that they're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes. Interestingly enough, Mark Zuckerberg openly admitted in this video that the fact checkers themselves had a bias in the fact checks themselves, but also in the things they picked in order to be fact-checked. So I think that's a very, very good move in the right direction. A couple of years ago at a speech at Georgetown, Mark Zuckerberg came out very, very strongly for free speech. But I think he retreated away from that position due to pressure from the Biden administration, but also from European governments, because this is another issue I think we have to spend more time on, which is that whenever you hear that the right is a threat to free speech, to democracy, to freedom, that they're all in favor of illiberal democracy or whatever the term du jour is actually. It's not true. If you listen to what's coming out of Europe, for example, it's left-leaning and left-wing governments, but also left-leaning and left-wing media outlets that are constantly pushing for more censorship, right? They say, oh, Elon Musk, he should not be allowed to run X. X should be banned in Europe. There should be new restrictions. There should be conditions. Who is allowed to publish what? It's the famous, there is free speech, but it's always what's after the but that really matters. And as you will find out very quickly, we saw this in the UK, and we talked about this on this show in the past as well, is, one wrong social media post can get you a visit by the police, or in the worst case, can even get you arrested. There is this new crime category, the non-crime category, if you want, that they have in the United Kingdom, which is called non-crime hate incidents. So the police can knock on your door and say, well, you haven't done anything wrong, but we just wanted to stop by and have a conversation with you. This is exactly what happens in authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. Like, they don't arrest you right away, but they show to you that they could if they would want to. So if the police knocks at your door and says, we just want to talk with you about something you posted on Facebook, something you posted on X, something you posted on Instagram, this is the attempt to intimidate the population, to intimidate the citizens. And at some point, are you really a citizen anymore in such a system, or do you become a subject instead? Right? There's the famous saying that in democracies, the government fears the people, and in tyrannies, the people fear the government. So ask yourself, if you happen to be in the United Kingdom, if you happen to be in Germany, if you happen to be in Austria, other European countries, if you happen to be in France, do you think that the government is more afraid of you, or do you think you have to be more afraid of the government? And I think the answer to this question tells you quite a lot. Now, there are other things that I believe are going to change. In the realm of energy, I think the Green New Deals, this idea, this lie, I might call it, that green energy is always cheap, that green energy, the green energy transition and revolution will be the source of future wealth and prosperity. This has always been a lie, right? This was always an ideological agenda that was sugar-coated with promises of economic prosperity so that people would sign up for it, that they would go along with it. But if we look at one recent graph that was published and posted by Bjorn Lomborg, right, what you can see in this picture is the percentage of solar and wind in the production of electricity. And on the y-axis, you see the electricity prices per kilowatt hour. And look at this, right? There's a clear correlation. The more wind and solar you have in your system, the more expensive electricity and, of course, then also on the long run, energy is. And most people in Germany with the idiotic energy transition, something we're also going to be talking about more in future episodes, everybody knew this. Everybody can see it on their energy bills. Ed Miliband, again in the United Kingdom, with his completely idiotic wind and rooftop revolution. I mean, it's going to be a revolution, but it's going to be a revolution that will make people significantly poorer. So this is something to keep in mind, that gradually more and more governments, starting with the election of Donald Trump, but I think it's going to happen elsewhere as well, more and more governments are coming into power that will end at least some of these delusions, or this is something that we can hope for. You see it also, this is from an Austrian think tank. If you look at this graph about electricity prices for industry, I mean, this is quite clearly, these are the dollar prices for megawatt hour, right? It's $84.6 per megawatt hour in the United States, and it's $242.1 for a megawatt hour for the industry in Europe. This is unsustainable. You cannot have these prices without deindustrialization. So what we are currently experiencing, more than anything, is a re-establishment of reality. So the question that is going to be, what will be done about it? I think this is going to be the very interesting question. We see trends what's going to happen in the United States, but it's going to be interesting to see also what's going to happen in Europe. But at this point of speaking, I think what we see primarily is the acceptance of reality. Let me show you another graph about what this energy transition has done, particularly to Germany. Now, if you look at this graph, right, the dotted red line, for those who are not at home, who don't see this video, like you have this upgoing dotted red line that would indicate that German industrial production is supposed to go up, to increase, right? The future should be better than the past. Tomorrow should be more prosperous than today and even more prosperous than yesterday. But what you see in Germany is the exact opposite, like that industrial production is breaking in, it's declining, it's becoming worse. And people are realizing that. And no matter how much you sugarcoat it, no matter how often von der Leyen goes out and says, oh, decarbonization and the Green New Deal is going to make Europe stronger, it is not. And this is becoming more and more obvious. The question is then what's going to be the alternative, right? Which parties could make a change? Which parties could lead to something else? And this is where we come to, of course, one of the more illustrious figures over the last couple of months or years, if you want, and that is Elon Musk. After engaging in the American presidential election, and I think we could say quite successfully so, he has set his sight on Europe at the moment. And this, of course, is leading to massive outrage all over the old continent. Like the leading class, the status quo elite, they cannot abide it. How dare he? I think they all are voicing currently their inner Greta Thunberg. How dare he to sound off on European politics? How dare he to sound off on politics in the United Kingdom? And, which is probably my favorite tweet of all times, a couple of weeks ago, he tweeted that only the AfD can save Germany. And this, of course, all hell break loose in Germany. You had Robert Habeck, right? Probably the worst minister of the economy in German ever, right? To say, hands off our democracy, Mr. Musk. You had Friedrich Merz, who said, well, I can't remember that any friendly nation has ever interfered in the election of another nation to such an extent. You have the entire media establishment, from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which supposedly is a conservative newspaper, to left-leaning newspaper like Der Spiegel, say Elon Musk is a grave threat to democracy. So what is he actually doing? What is this grave threat to democracy that Elon Musk supposedly is guilty of? Well, it mainly is saying the absolutely obvious. Politics, in particular Western European states and countries over the last couple of decades, have been a disaster. The status quo has been a disaster. And everybody who is now standing up supposedly against the grave threat of Elon Musk was one way or another complicit in this horrible status quo. That's not hyperbolic. You saw the graph before. Right? We were promised cheap energy prices thanks to wind and solar. The exact opposite happened. We were promised an industrial revolution where Europe will be in the forefront in new and modern technologies. The exact opposite happened. We were promised that we don't need fossil fuels, that we don't need nuclear energy. The exact opposite happened. We were promised that mass migration will lead to a cultural renaissance, that the people coming to Europe, that they will finance our welfare state, they will work in they will be the new doctors, they will be the new engineers. None of this happened. You have the occasional doctor, you have the occasional engineer, but most people who came to Europe ended up in the welfare state and have been a drag on the economic system. I published about this in one of my recent Substack posts, and I hate to toot my own horn, but I would be very grateful for anyone who would also consider subscribing to it, because the numbers are all there. This is the thing. If you listen how the conversation around Elon Musk is developing, it is not that they accuse him of lying. It is they say, well, but he's an agenda. He's not really interested in the things that he's talking about. This is just because he's pushing an agenda. But to be honest, so what? This is like saying that a surgeon who diagnoses you with cancer and says, we have to remove the cancer, that you say, wait a moment, you don't really care about the cancer. You're just pushing your agenda, your anti-cancer agenda. Maybe so. Does it really matter? The same thing with Elon Musk. If he can draw attention, if he can kind of reorient politics towards, or the public debate towards reality, that's a good thing. I don't agree with everything that Elon Musk does. Like, if you follow my podcast, you know I'm not the biggest fan of electric vehicles. I think he's way too optimistic about what solar energy can do. So there are lots of things where I find myself disagreeing with Elon Musk. But to make the case that the establishment parties in Germany, in the United Kingdom, in France, and also, of course, in the United States before Donald Trump took over the Republican Party, that they are responsible for the misery and the troubles that we find ourselves in. That's absolutely true. And it's just a nice change of wind, let's put it this way, if finally somebody that has a massive platform is not saying the same things that all the other platforms have been saying for decades. Nobody complained when Jack Dorsey, right, the founder of X, the founder of Twitter, was a left-of-center activist. Nobody complained when George Soros is using his money to influence politics. So it's just, I think, the kind of almost allergic reaction on the left and the center left, that maybe at some point there will be similar figures, but this time on the right, I think that's a good thing. And it's also, that's, by the way, something where the right has to be careful, because one of the big speaking and talking points on the right is being anti-elitist. And I like that, right? I think the idea that there is a responsibility and to speak for the working class, as Donald Trump does, is very important. But you also need an elite. So what we are currently experiencing, and this brings me back to the point that I made originally at the beginning of today's episode, is there has to be a counter-elite. Right? There has to be a right-wing counter-elite. We cannot just let all of this going in a free flow, because this is the big difference between the left and the right, or has been the big difference between the left and the right in the past, is that the left understands that power is something that's both important, crucial, and that is something to be used. I think the right always has, which I sympathize with to some extent, but there's always the libertarian temptation, right? This idea, we just let the marketplace of ideas, the marketplace in the economy, we just let it flow, and ultimately the best ideas are gonna win. The left never thought like this. Of course, the left barely are, except when it comes to, to sexual issues, is never truly libertarian. So they understood, if you want to change the world, you have to actively push for it. And I think this is something that the right should also keep in mind. This brings me to a point, I already announced it, tonight at 7 p.m. Central European time. There is the X space between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel. If you're too busy to watch it, I will give you a quick reaction video right after it is over. But this, I think, is going to be very interesting because, and I also will do a quick reaction video on why I think that at this point in time, the decision to support the AfD in Germany is the correct one. There is all over the West, and I think the same was true for Donald Trump, but the same is true for the AfD in Germany. We are in case of emergency break glass kind of situation. So there are some elements within the AfD I'm not particularly happy with. But I think given all the possible choices about who is supposed to govern Germany in the future, in this case, most likely in a coalition government, I think the AfD is the best possible choice. The AfD, despite all the issues that might be with the party, is still the one most grounded in reality. And there is nothing Germany and Europe, by extension, needs more than political parties that are grounded in reality. The flights of fancy we had from the Greens and the Social Democrats and all the other left parties and the lukewarm supposed conservatives, this has to end. The Merkel, Scholz, Habecks, they have to go. They had their chance. They had the moment in the spotlight. They were in power. They ruined the country. Now somebody else is supposed to take over. And if Elon Musk pushes for this change, if he supports Alice Weidel and the AfD, I'm all there for it. I think it is the right step in time. And the other point is, let us not constantly underestimate the strength of our institutions. This idea that we've also been hearing about Donald Trump, that if he gets elected, this is going to be the last election ever. Everybody who pushed for this in the media and politics knew it was not true. They openly lied to you. They tried to scare you. And now they also very often try to blackmail you with threats of intimidating you, either by sending the police with those non-crime hate incidents and other issues. You see the same again in Germany, where nobody was suing people who just made mild criticisms of politicians more than the Green Party. So they are very, very thin-skinned because they know they're wrong. This is, again, the big difference to Donald Trump. Say whatever you want about Trump. He believes, and I think in many cases he believes that he's right. So he doesn't care what people say about him. Again, he can be thin-skinned on occasion, but the idea, as it happened in Germany, that a single dad with a child suffering from Down syndrome is going to be sued by, as it happened in the German case, by Robert Habeck, because he said that Habeck is a moron. Donald Trump, I have very, very sincere doubts that he would ever do this. I think this would never cross his mind in a million years. And this brings me back to what I said before. The more thin-skinned, the less humorous politicians are, the more dangerous they are. Another topic I want to kind of towards the end talk about a little bit, and this is the faint-hearted among us probably want to tune out now, because this is a topic I think that's very, very difficult and very hard to talk about for a variety of reasons that we'll have to get into more in the weeks and years to come. But one of the services, and I think it is a service, that Elon Musk has provided was to draw attention to things that we knew were going on, but nobody wanted to talk about it because it was a topic that might, doesn't come across well at dinner parties, or it's in polite society, we're afraid of being ostracized. And that is an epidemic of sexual violence that we have in Europe, in the UK, and a lot of this is driven, and again, I say this with a heavy heart, but a lot of it is driven by mass migration. I mean, if you look, this is from Sweden, if you look at a study that in Sweden, that men of non-European origin commit 84% of assault rapes despite only making up 10% of the population. An Algerian is 122 times more likely to commit aggravated rape than a Swede, and an Afghan is 69 times more likely. Now, again, does this mean that every Afghan is a rapist? No. Does it mean that every Algerian is a rapist? Absolutely not. But obviously, and this is the argument that Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the activist and wife of the British-American historian now, Neil Ferguson, has been making, there is a different attitude towards violence. There is a different attitude towards sexual violence in specific parts of this world. It's based in tradition, it's based in culture, and there is a religious element to it. I think this constant denying the reality of it is a mistake. These are uncomfortable topics because I think deep down all of us still, or not all of us, but many of us still have the dream, wouldn't the world be a great place if everybody would just think alike, if our moral ideas, if our moral visions would be the same everywhere. But they aren't. And this idea, as the late Christopher Hitchens always sometimes argued, that if you come to Europe, if you come to the West, you will adapt immediately to its seductiveness, right? And it's because these moral values are so obviously the right ones that everybody will sign up to them. This is not what happened. the European or Western moral experience, the moral development, the moral evolution was a very specific one. I think it was a very good one. I'm sure there are people in the world who see it differently. And that's fine. But then they should stay within the cultural confines of where they believe that, or where their morals come from and the kind of morality they want to live. I think it should not enter us. These two different moral values that we currently see clashing all over the West, they don't mix, they don't match. This is not healthy. It's not healthy for the people who come here, and it's not healthy for the people who live here. And the other thing, of course, is that this is I put together, this was done by Carl Benjamin, who's a friend of mine from the Lotus Eaters podcast. One of the things that Elon Musk has drawn a lot of attention to are the so-called grooming gangs in the United Kingdom. I mean, grooming gangs, I said this recently on Talk TV during an appearance as well, is a very euphemistic term. These are rape gangs, right? What happened in the United Kingdom in the thousands. Some, Charlie Peters at GB News, Mark Stein, some others have tried to draw attention to this, very often to no avail. Konstantin Kisin and Trigonometry, they tried to speak about this issue, but nobody took real an interest in it. It's only now that Elon Musk has pushed hard for this issue that we kind of hear more about it. And the media did try to downplay it. A friend of mine or a colleague of mine at the Süddeutsche Zeitung sent me an email and saying, wait, we talked about this. We had one article on this issue in 2017. So you had the industrialized gang rape of very often underage, white, working class British girls. And the Süddeutsche Zeitung had one article about it. There is no Sammy Woodhouse, Samantha Smith, victims of these rape gangs are not household names. George Floyd is a household name. Everybody in Austria, everybody in Germany knows who George Floyd is. In Afghanistan, in Kabul, they put up murals for George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter movement, everybody knew about these things. But about the grooming gangs, the industrialized gang rape of underage girls in the United Kingdom, nobody talked about it. Because it was uncomfortable. Because one would have to admit that maybe there are significant downsides to mass migration. And maybe there are significant downsides to mass migrations from particular parts of the world. Because it is, again, unfortunately, I take no pleasure in saying this. I get aggravated because it's such a serious issue. And you immediately have, and I sometimes cannot help myself, almost a sense of guilt that you say, by pointing out something that is factually true, you still say, am I a racist? Is it racist to say that, for example, in the British case, Pakistani men are overrepresented? Is it racist to say that the likelihood is in Sweden that somebody from Algeria is 122 times more likely to engage in sexual violence? I don't know, but it's a fact on the ground. And the other thing is, what worries me more? To say, I cannot say this because I might feel bad and thereby ignore the truth and thereby also deny the victims justice that they deserve? Or is it more important to kind of, in almost a form of cognitive behavioral theory, to jump over this sense and say, listen, this is happening. This is going on. There is no excuse for ignoring it. There is no excuse that nobody knows these victims because this makes them victims twice. First of a crime, and then being ignored for being the victim of a crime. I want to do something now also. In Germany, again, there was a significant element. Everybody heard about the New Year's Eve in Cologne a couple of years back. Similar things happened this year. And apparently by the German police, whoever is responsible for this, I would argue, did quite the public service. They leaked the names. They leaked the first names of the people involved in this. And if you take a look at these names, I mean, it's a massive, massive overrepresentation of things that we would generally describe as non-German names. As I always say, because the immediate counter-argument is, well, but you cannot generalize. No, that's fair, you cannot generalize. But risk-taking, let's put it this way, or there is something, likelihoods still do exist. And there is now a very clear pattern that when it comes to certain kinds of crimes, when it comes to certain kinds of offenses against the public peace, right, that very often the likelihood of it coming from a part of the population that only is a very, very small share of the overall population, but massively overrepresented in these kinds of crimes. This is going on. And to be more afraid of being called a racist, of being called a bigot, of being called a far-right extremist, if we fear that more, then we fear speaking the truth, then we have a real problem. And this is, again, what gives me hope about this change of trends that's happening in Europe and the United States with Donald Trump, with what Mark Zuckerberg has said about Meta. Because I think now maybe we can have these conversations. Now we can actually find solutions. And yes, this will entail massive, massive changes to the ways in which we look at how people who come into this country or in any country, whether or not they have a right to stay here. As I said, uncomfortable topics, they make me feel uncomfortable. And I understand if you listen to this at home and say, these are uncomfortable topics, this is hard to talk about, but we need to talk about it because otherwise we're going to get more of it. There are no problems in this world that get solved by ignoring them. They get worse. And I want to give you, again, this is, again, a very painful thing to do, but I want to read to you a couple of the instances of what was happening in the United Kingdom, because these stories never make it out. But as I said, okay, something was going on there. Was it maybe consensual or not consensual, but was it really as bad as Elon Musk claims it was? Well, I let you be the judge of this. I take you one example, what happened in Oldham in 2006. A 12-year-old girl named Sophie, the name was changed in order to protect the individual's identity, entered a police station and reported that she had just been molested in a graveyard by a man named Ali. The name is also altered. A desk officer told her to come back with an adult when she was sober. Two men accosted her in the police station. Joined by a third, they raped her in their car. When they dumped her on the street, she asked a man named Sava Ali for directions. He took her to his home, raped her, and gave her money for a bus fare home. A man named Shakil Chowdhury pulled up in his car and offered to take her home. He abducted her and took her to a house where he and 4 other men repeatedly raped her. A 12-year-old girl has been gang raped in broad daylight in the United Kingdom of 2006. And this has been going on for decades. We should know those names, right? We should know both of the perpetrators, but also the victims. As Mark Stein, he talks about this quite a bit, and he had these people also on his show. There are people like Samantha Smith, like Sammy Woodhouse. There are people who took their lives. There are people who have been murdered, and we never hear about this. If you look at this picture of the current British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, this is him taking a knee during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. Why is it that a British Prime Minister takes a knee for something that happens in the United States, but he apparently is not capable of taking a knee for victims in the United Kingdom? It is also, by the way, as we know now, also a form of racism, if obviously the victims in these cases, all these girls are British white working class girls, and they have been picked precisely for that reason. These are all things that we now know because they came out in court documents. We see similar things happening, and I think Elon Musk has just been drawing attention to the United Kingdom. But let me show you one headline from Austria from just a couple of days ago. A 12-year-old girl who was abused and forced to provide oral sex and other sexual services. According to the court, even though she said no, the court said, well, no does not necessarily mean no. So this is the same thing. Apparently, if the background of the perpetrators happens to be of a non-native bent, then both judges, the system seems to be very, very lenient. Samantha Smith, the girl I talked about before, that is very often featured on Mark Stein, right? When she went to the police for being abused, she was an underage girl, and what the police basically was asking her was whether she consented. Well, she was at an age where she couldn't really consent. I don't think that a girl at the age of 12 can consent. And I do understand something that the judge said, which I think is not entirely wrong. There is a role of social media. There are lots of influences that make this situation even worse. But the point is that there are clear patterns. And let me warn you, and everybody who's watching this, these things will spread. If you do not crack down on that kind of deviance, on that kind of abhorrent moral and criminal behavior, you will get more of it. There's this idea that you can turn a blind eye to these crimes when they happen within a part of one community, and that it will remain confined to that community. It won't. It's the same thing as used to happening in recent years with people plowing with cars into crowds. If it happens within one particular ideological bent, it will spread to others. So this will not remain limited to one part of the population, migrant or otherwise. So something has to happen. And the first thing to do is to accept and admit that this is going on. There was a vote in the British Parliament yesterday whether there should be an inquiry into the grooming gangs, into this rape scandal. 364 Labour MPs and their allies voted against it, and 111 Conservative and Reform Party MPs voted for it. So the current British government doesn't even want an inquiry. And again, we hear, well, this is because Keir Starmer said it's because people try to jump on the far right bandwagon. So what? So what? Yes, if if respectable politicians, if center politicians ignore these issues and it's picked up by the far right, that's not the mistake of the far right. That's the mistake of those who are supposedly in the middle. That's the mistake of those who are supposedly in the center. If you ignore evil going on, or in the British case, I would even say, if you collude with evil, as it happened, then don't be surprised if at some point somebody picks these issues up. And if it's the far right, if it's Nigel Farage, if it's Tommy Robinson, it's the AfD, it's the FPÖ, it's Marine Le Pen, I do not care. These things cannot continue to go on, and whoever is picking them up and speaking out about them, including Elon Musk, is doing a service. This is a good thing. Let me give you another example. From the court documents. I want to give you two more and then allow you to ponder upon this and see whether you think that this is something we should not talk about more. Again, this is not for the faint-hearted, so you might want to tune out if you happen to be easily offended. Girls like Julie, who was 16 years old but has been assessed as a functioning at the mental age of 4 and was living with foster care. So we have here a girl, apparently, which was suffering from certain mental disabilities. Now, let me see what happened. Numerous meetings were held, but as Julie was describing the abuse as consensual, South Yorkshire police informed us they could not act because apparently a 16-year-old with the mental capacity of a 4-year-old can give consent. And this is not for the faint-hearted. Her foster carer would describe her as turning up home, dripping sperm from every orifice and needing to bathe her and tend to her wounds. This kind of abuse is unheard of and should be unheard of in any civilized society. And if things like this take place, turning a blind eye towards it or ignoring it in the name of multicultural sensitivities or because you don't want to provoke, as they say in the United Kingdom, euphemistically, community tensions, you collude with evil. There is no other way to put this. I want to give you a last example from the court filings, from the court documents, just kind of to make clear what was going on. So this is from the official court documents. You, Mohammed Kara, prepared her for gang anal rape by using a pump to expand her anal passage. You subjected her to a gang rape by 5 or 6 men. At one point, she had 4 men inside her. A red ball was placed in her mouth to keep her quiet. Not only were you both involved in a commercial sexual exploitation of GH, you also used her for your own self-gratification. You both raped her when she was under 13. When she was very young, although it is not clear whether she was under 13, you both raped her at the same time, oral and vaginal anal. It happened on more than one occasion. So we hear these stories all over the place. We're not talking about 1 girl, 2 girls, 3 girls. Based on last count, we talk about thousands of girls in more than 50 British cities, in more than 50 British towns. And I'm sure that more of this is going on. So when I said at the beginning of today's show that we are in a struggle for civilization, not just in the grand geopolitical picture, but also what's happening in our very own neighborhoods, I do not think that I've been exaggerating. And at this point, as I said before, very often making political decisions is picking between the less of 2 or more evils. And if, as it's currently happening, if Elon Musk, if he's kind of drawing attention to these issues, whatever his true intention or his agenda might be, I think he's doing us a service because these stories need to be told. If everybody knows BLM, if everybody knows George Floyd, I think we should also know the other people and other people that suffer within our own communities. On this more sobering note, I close for today's show. There is more to come because I think now more than ever, it is important that we engage in the conversation discourse because we are at a time when we can shape things to come. And I think all of us should try to make as positive as possible a contribution to this. Thank you very much. I'll see all of you soon.